You guys, this is going to be a hard video to do because I genuinely do love Breaking Dawn, but I know we finally have come to the point where we have to talk about imprinting. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not looking forward to it. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, welcome to my channel. My name is Stephanie. It's Anya, Steph Anya for short, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Today, I'm going to be breaking down Breaking Dawn Part 1. We'll be going through the first half of the book and the very first Breaking Dawn movie. If you're curious, stay tuned. What's on your mind? Before we jump too far in, let's talk about today's sponsor, which is NordVPN. NordVPN protects you when you are on public Wi-Fi from having data breaches. We've actually been using NordVPN for years on our own. One of the things that we're always worried about is when we're connecting to Wi-Fi, if we don't have service, when we're traveling, we want to make sure that we're connecting and feeling safe doing so. Also, since a lot of my content is breaking down TV shows, breaking down movies, when we travel, sometimes we don't have access to it. I remember we were on my birthday trip and I needed to watch Love is Blind and we couldn't access it in the country that we were in. We were able to set our VPN to our home city so that we would be able to watch it. You just click on Quick Connect. It hides your IP address and makes it so that you can connect to the country that makes the most sense for you in that moment. If you're interested in trying NordVPN for yourself, please use my link, which is nordvpn.com/StephAnya, which will be in the description box. And if you sign up for 2 years, you will get 4 months free with your subscription. It's a limited time offer and it's risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. So try it for yourself and see if you like it. First, I have to talk about my overall feelings about this movie. This historically has been my absolute favorite of the Twilight series. If you're new to this series that I'm doing, I am a Twilight fan and a therapist. So what I do is I share my experience initially watching it, reading it, how it changed when I became an adult, and then how it ultimately has changed since becoming a therapist. But I do want to make sure you all know that just because I see the flaws of this story and I see the lessons that we learned when we were younger that were not healthy, I still am able to compartmentalize that and enjoy the content for what it is. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about my first experience with it as well as what I think about it now. I think the soundtrack on this one is really good. I love the colors of this movie. I mean, both the wedding that Bella dreams about in her nightmare, as well as the actual wedding, are so beautiful. Till this day, I still love to watch it. But with that, there are a lot of things to talk about. So we are brought into Breaking Dawn by seeing the wedding invites going out. This is how the movie starts, which I think is a very strong start to the movie. The books start differently. The books kind of highlight Bella's transformation into adulthood, but also it highlights Edward's control because basically we are introduced to her with the brand new car at the gas station. It's a Mercedes that she finds out is missile proof. What she agreed to with Edward is that once her truck died, she would allow him to buy her a car, and then mysteriously her car all of a sudden gives out and now she has this new car that she's driving around in. So it's implied that Edward has something to do with her truck. Obviously we see the control and manipulation there as he makes a deal with you and then goes behind your back and expedites the terms of that deal. So it was definitely something that I thought was cute when I was younger, and now kind of looking at it, it's like, well, she's been driving that truck the whole time you've known her, and the biggest threat to her life has been you. So why are we so obsessed about the car she's driving? But again, in the movie, it's a very different beginning. We just see the wedding invites going out and Jacob going missing, running. That is consistent with the books. And the books is actually an even bigger deal, where they do have missing signs up because Charlie is looking for Jacob, whereas obviously Bella and Jacob's dad know that he is in wolf form. So any posters with a boy that looks like Jacob is not going to help anyone find him. This movie very much focused on just the wedding, the honeymoon, those first days of being newlyweds. That's what attracted kids like me just, oh, this is the part of life I'm looking forward to when you get married and you have a honeymoon. So one of the biggest things that we'll have to talk about here, of course, is what age is appropriate to get married. I get that question a lot. Sometimes I have really young people coming to me for premarital counseling, or what I love even more are people who are coming to me before they're engaged to kind of assess whether or not it makes sense to move forward with an engagement. And so I am not one of those people who's like, you don't need to get married when you're young, because I think that it definitely differs based on person. But I will say that you have a lower likelihood of having a successful marriage when you get married, typically prior to 25. And a lot of that boils down to not having a fully developed prefrontal cortex. It's responsible for like the higher cognitive thinking. So decision-making, judgment, reasoning, those things take place in your prefrontal cortex. And so that's one of the biological reasons that could affect your marriage. Even if we look at socioeconomic factors, it can be a lot more difficult to be financially stable at those ages. You might still be more reliant on your parents, thus having conflicting rationale that you're having to balance and negotiate. The decision about when to have children, especially when there are a lot of elements of adulthood that you haven't experienced yet, and biologically being more fertile at that age, having children younger is a lot more likely. However, they may not have the resources to be able to fully support those children. And so I don't think that it's something where if I hear a young person is getting married, I'm automatically thinking, oh, this is going to end in divorce. Partly personal bias. I got married when I was 24. It was definitely not something that I feel like I would change. Even earlier, my husband and I have been together for a long time, even at that point. And so that's why I don't say it's an end all be all in terms of what age you get married. But I think for Bella being 18, especially since a lot of the reason why she's getting married in the first place is trying to negotiate with Edward on the things that she's wanting. She wants Edward to turn her into a vampire. He says that he'll do that if she marries him. One of the more annoying things that happens throughout the book is that Edward constantly refers to her as Mrs. Cullen. And he is literally, if you search Mrs. Cullen in the book, it is only uttered through his mouth. We never see another character ever refer to Bella that way. And so I think that the idea of marriage was so much more important to him, being able to share a last name with her. And we know that for Bella, it was not as important. So in that sort of situation, if you couple that with age, highly unlikely that that marriage is going to be successful. If you're feeling pressured to get married because maybe your friends are getting married, or the most common one I hear is that honestly, people are ready to have sex and they may have beliefs that they shouldn't have sex outside of marriage. I also don't feel that that is a strong reason to get married. We could agree to disagree on that, but I think that that sexual lust is not enough of a foundation to be the starting point for a successful marriage. And that is also what it boiled down to for Edward and Bella, because Bella wanted to have sex with Edward, and Edward said that he wouldn't feel comfortable doing that before marriage. And again, he is just more traditional. I don't view that as controlling. I just think that if you're in a position where your partner is not on the same page about that, if they do agree to marry you, you should be concerned, because if they don't believe in marriage or want to get married right now, but they want to have sex with you, and this is a stipulation that you've put in place, their rationale for getting married may be flawed. So all in all, I don't think that getting married young is necessarily a recipe for disaster, but there are some factors that could make it more difficult to be successful in the long run. But I think one of the more important things to talk about is that transition from dating into marriage. That is where I end up seeing a lot of couples, surprisingly, because a lot of people assume that you'll be in the honeymoon phase of marriage. And a lot of times that is not the reality, because that transition into being a married person is so difficult, because you balance the societal expectations with your own expectations based on what you experienced growing up. And then we got the reality, right? And so what I see a lot of times are people who are coming to me saying, I thought that I was going to be cooking every day and I'm not cooking, and I feel this immense amount of guilt. So sometimes they'll come to me individually in that respect, just trying to grapple with how disappointed they are with themselves at this point in life that they envisioned for so long, fantasized about, and it's not living up to their expectations. Or a lot of times they'll come to me as a couple and say, we're really having a hard time shifting into those marital roles from just dating. For me, the biggest thing I say here is to kind of try to release your expectations of the difference between a marital role and just being in a relationship with someone. That is where we start seeing the biggest difficulty and differences, is that maybe when you guys were dating, one of you loved to go out at night with your friends, go clubbing, and then now that you're married, your spouse expects you to never go out. Those are the kind of things that actually need to be addressed during the dating stage. You can't wait to get married to someone and then say, oh, you're married now, so you shouldn't be doing these things that are a part of this person's personality, a big part of their social life. If they naturally just end up not wanting to do those things, that's different. However, if you are using the fact that a person has a new role as a reason for them to change their relationship with other people, as well as change their relationship to their self, that can be a very disastrous line to walk. Why? Because even if they ultimately give in and make those changes, what I see in the long term for the people who come to me 20 years later is a major sense of resentment. They feel like a piece of them has been taken. So you want to make sure that you're marrying someone who has a lifestyle that you are comfortable with right now. You don't want to marry someone and think, oh, after we get married, this person is going to stop flirting with other people. If they're a naturally flirtatious person and you're letting that slide while you guys are dating, more than likely that's also going to happen when you're married. So maybe you envision your partner is going to become an early bird because now you're married, and you envisioned you guys waking up in the morning, kissing and making breakfast together. If they weren't an early bird when you guys were dating, more than likely they're probably not going to be an early bird in marriage. It could transform into that over time, but marriage itself is not going to be enough of a catalyst for that change. So make sure that the person that you are dating is who you want to have as a spouse as they are right now, instead of thinking that once they have a ring on their finger, they're going to become a new person, because that leads to a lot of resentment and bitterness. Now we got to take some time to talk about Leah. The storyline with Leah is interesting because when I first was introduced to Leah in the books, we hear about how Sam was Leah's partner. They were together in love, and then he met her cousin who came into town and imprinted on her. But the way that Leah acts is so frustrating that you almost forget that. At least I did. It was like, she's so annoying. Oh, now she wants to be part of Jacob's pack. I was always so frustrated with her bad attitude. But this is one of those things where, as an adult, and especially as a therapist, I look at it so differently, because I work with a lot of the Leahs of the world, the people who are really very, very hurt and broken. And the only way to be able to navigate the world is to utilize tools like anger to keep people at bay. Why? So they can protect themselves from getting hurt again. We talked about this a little bit in maybe a clips about Jacob, how once he was hurt, we started seeing a character shift for him. And Leah, we just happened to meet after that character shift. I highly doubt she and Sam would have been as close as they were if she was acting this way back when they were together. I get questions sometimes on how do you deal with the person who's difficult this way. You know, this is a lot of times what I'm working with in session, either with couples or more specifically when I'm working with a family and you have a teenager or someone who is expressing a lot of anger. Now, obviously with teenagers in general, there's still a lot of developing happening with hormones, and they're in a stage of life that we call identity versus role confusion, where they're at a place where they're trying to figure out who they are versus what they've been told to be. They go through different phases as they're trying to figure out who they are. The actress they casted to play Leah, she really did look older, but so did Sam. So I'm not sure what their ages were supposed to be. I mean, she looks like she's probably at least 25, and Sam looks like he's in his 30s in the movies to me. So I'm going to put age out of the equation for why she's angry. I think that she's similar to what we talked about with Rosalie, probably more so depressed. Imagine having to hear your ex's thought and their immense love and calm regarding someone else, let alone your own cousin that you introduced them to. Of course she's angry. How do you work through that? We think of anger as a secondary emotion. Usually it's underpinned by fear or hurt. The fear here for Leah might be never imprinting, always being stuck in this immense sense of loss of the relationship that she had with Sam. And her hurt is obviously that sense of feeling rejected. I think the scene that really gets me now is when she's talking to Jacob, and Jacob so cruelly says to her,
"Look, Seth doesn't want you here, and neither do I."
and she's not even fazed by that. She says to him,
"Being unwanted isn't exactly a new thing for me."
the gravity of those words, I'm used to being unwanted, and how many of us can relate to that. If you are to peel back all of the other issues that we're working through in therapy, that is probably the number one thing that I'm working with on clients, is this sense of abandonment and rejection, which boils into what? A sense of being unwanted. Usually it starts with our parents. I'm assuming that with Leah, that was not the case because her parents seemed to be very involved. But we can get those attachment wounds from even relationships that we have later in life. It's not always just wounds that we get from our parents. I get a lot of questions about that as well when it comes to attachment. Sometimes you can have a very secure bond with someone that ends up being betrayed in some way, maybe outside of their control. I've had people who've come to me about losing a parent because the person was killed unexpectedly, but they still feel abandoned by that person, even though they know rationally it wasn't their choice. The reality is, end is the same. Here I am trying to navigate life without your help, and I never thought I was going to be in this position. To work through that, Leah would first need to acknowledge that hurt. So even hearing her say she's used to being unwanted, as a therapist, your ears will perk up at that, and that would give you an entirely new direction for therapy. And we would talk about spaces where she has felt wanted, the potential for finding spaces like that again, and what peace is possible. You know, sometimes it's not possible, but understanding what peace is possible for her when it comes to the situation with Sam and Emily. Right now, she's like stuck in this perpetual trap. So Jacob claiming his role as alpha gives her a new option, right? That was a new opportunity that she seized to get out of this loop. And that's important too. We have to talk about that, because something that I do see is that sometimes people are a lot more comfortable staying stuck in their pain. And you're like, why would somebody feel comfortable in pain? Because it's familiar. It's pain they can predict. It's pain that they can navigate. They know this pain. For example, I'll compare it to being at a job that you hate. You're in a job where every day you wake up crying, or you leave so frustrated, your self-worth is being diminished, yet you don't apply for other jobs. And you tell yourself, there's probably nothing better out there. I don't want to just leave this situation and go into a worse situation. That fear is you being comfortable with your current pain and not being open to new experiences that could possibly lead to less pain. So Leah even making that choice to join Jacob's pack with no awareness of what his plan was, risking the possibility of still feeling the hurt that she feels emotionally, just in a new setting with a less experienced leader. She took that risk. And sometimes that's all it takes for us to break that repetitive loop of hurt and pain that we're dealing, is to take the risk, breaking up with the person that has been making us feel terrible about ourselves, applying for other jobs. You don't even have to leave, just opening your mind up to opportunities. And so that is, I think, the biggest lesson that we can learn from Leah, is that she saw an opportunity to change the source, what she believed was the source of her pain and frustration. She took that opportunity, even though there were some risk involved in taking that chance. And so I have a new respect for Leah that I didn't have before. The next thing I want to talk about is Bella's decision to continue with her pregnancy. Now, I'm not going to go too far into this because I'm not going to talk about like pro-life versus pro-choice. This is not that type of video. What I want to talk about specifically is Edward's comment, which is,
Bella, we're supposed to be partners, remember? But you decided this on your own. You've decided to leave me, because it's me who'll lose you. And I don't choose that.
And I think that in that moment, Edward makes a valid argument in terms of what partnership looks like. Now, it's ironic given how many choices Edward makes that affects Bella without her consent, right? But I think if we are just to take the baby element out of this, talking about that in terms of just partnership in general, in your marriage, your long-term relationships, your long-term platonic friendships, you will come upon situations where there is no compromise. Either one person is going to get their way or the other person is going to get their way. This is something I work with my couples on a lot. Okay, so in John Gottman's book, 8 Dates, we did read this in the What's On Your Page book club. Lots of good stuff in here, but one of the things he talks about are the arguments where there is possibility for moving forward on them versus the arguments where there are not. He says, if you have the book on page 72, our research has shown that most relational conflict is not resolvable. Isn't that crazy to think about? That it is drilled into us, compromise, compromise, compromise. And research has shown that most relational conflict is not resolvable. But here's the thing that they found in their research is that a lot of times this sort of conflict that is not resolvable, couples divorce and then they remarry other people and encounter the exact same problems or similar problems, right? In this case with Edward and Bella, this is a specific problem. But if they were to, let's say, break up, get with someone else, the real issue here is competing values, which they've had from the very beginning. Hence, one of them wanting to get married and the other one not really believing in marriage. And now one of them wanting to prioritize a relationship and the other one wanting to prioritize the new life that they've created through their love. These are competing values. I think for Edward, he already had his family and he wanted to just keep Bella. He did not care about this new person entering the family. And for Bella, this was a miracle that she wanted to hold on to. They actually said that 69% of the time, conflict is not resolvable. It's what they call a perpetual problem, something that's always going to be an issue. Now, this doesn't really apply to Edward and Bella because this was a time-sensitive issue. It's not something that they're going to be talking about forever. They didn't really know the situation. For all we knew, Bella could have been pregnant for 20 years. It just seemed like it was something unheard of. And this is something that I do see with couples, is that the uncertainty makes something what we would consider to be a perpetual problem, even if ultimately in the long run we see that it was something that was a temporary problem. It feels perpetual because there's no end in sight. We don't know what the end is going to be. What's the best way to handle this type of situation? Unfortunately, I wish I had a perfect answer for that, but of course it's going to vary on the issue. But I do think this is the kind of thing I encourage people to think about before they get married, which is, what are your beliefs when it comes to my body? Because it doesn't have to be about a baby. Sometimes I'll see, like I worked with a couple at one point where one of the partners was diagnosed with cancer, and this person said they never ever wanted to go through chemotherapy, and their partner was not in agreement about that. They said, I don't want you to just give up. You are giving up on us. You're giving up on me. That's how they interpreted that. And the other person says, I'm doing the opposite. I want to be able to live as much life as possible without having to go through treatments that may not work and will take time away from us. And those kind of decisions are very, very difficult to talk about. And honestly, even if you talk about it beforehand, it's still hypothetical, it's theoretical, but you want to have some idea about how you all view physical autonomy and other decisions. Like, even if you have a job opportunity that could really catapult your career, it requires you to move to a different country. That could be an issue that you guys are constantly working on. So it's not just this specific type of issue. These types of issues that are based in our values. If you're the person who strongly values your career improvement and trajectory, and the other person values being close to family and being able to, drive 5 minutes down the road and be able to see family, you guys are never going to be in agreement when it comes to having to relocate for work. So for the couples that I see that are most successfully able to navigate these sort of perpetual problems, or what I like to think of as value-based problems, a difference in values, is constantly be curious about your partner's perspective. Be genuinely interested in learning about it instead of trying to sway them over to your side. The best thing you can do is actually walk away understanding why they feel about something the way that they do. I'm not big on making our marital conversations debates. When you make everything a debate, then your conversations become very exhausting for a lot of people. What you want to do instead is be able to listen enough to reflect back to your partner what they're saying. So in Edward's case, he should be able to say back to Bella, because for him, you didn't even think of it as a child. For you, this being represents our love, and you don't want to let go of the hope that we could create something together, even willing to risk your life for it. And Bella should be able to say back to him, and for you, it seems like losing me is the ultimate sacrifice. I know you would never sacrifice my life for anything or anyone. At the end of the day, you're not convincing each other differently, and a choice still has to be made. In this case, with it being Bella's body, she had more of a say over what was going to be done. And there may be other cases where Edward would have more of the upper hand. However, those situations are not fixed. That's not what anybody wants to hear. People come to me because they're looking for solutions. They want to fix things. But unfortunately, everything can't be fixed. Sometimes the best thing we can do is address the anger, frustration, and resentment that's building up in us through understanding, getting clarity on, I don't agree with this, but at least I can understand why you see it that way, which makes me less angry and resentful of you. So ultimately, when it comes to making choices as a couple, you're not always going to agree, but the best thing you can do is at least articulate why and be open to hearing your partner's reasons why, and recognize that even if we can't make the same decision, I still value your opinion. I want to understand why you see things the way that you do. And sometimes that's the best we can do, is just respect our partner. It's not necessarily obeying them, but respecting them can go a long way in helping with relationship longevity. Okay, guys, and now we're talking about what everybody wants me to talk about, which is, what do I think about imprinting? Now, I talked about in the last video when we were introduced to the concept of imprinting that my initial thoughts about it, I had no problem with it. And I'm not going to lie, even when we got to the point where Jacob imprinted on Renesmee, that honestly didn't bother me because I read the books and they'd already explained through another character that's not fully explored, but you see a little peek of him in the movie. I think it's Quill who imprints on a little girl named Claire. She's like 2 or 3. And they talk about how the relationship with imprinting is not the same as falling in love. It's that basically this person becomes the center of your world. Quill relates to Claire like a big brother, like a nanny, a babysitter. Like he wants to help with her birthday plans, and he takes her to the beach and he spends hours playing patty cake with her and things like that. And they even talk about, from a physiological standpoint, the way that imprinting affects you is that you don't even really see the faces of other girls in this case. Women, girls, like he said, like you look at them and you don't even really see their face, you know? And so that's part of why they don't even consider being with someone else. In the books, Jacob actually says to Quill, like, what do you think about just dating someone until she's at least your age? I don't think she would care about that. And he was like, I have no desire for that. I honestly am okay with it. So for them, you know, we have to remember this is obviously not the real world. So that's where we get tricky when we're psychoanalyzing fantasy, because, you know, it's also not normal for a person to survive on eating human blood or just animal blood, right? So we're obviously not talking about the real world here. So within this fantasy world, I didn't find anything odd about imprinting, but looking at it older as a therapist, it is interesting that Stephenie Meyer made it so that you could imprint on someone who was not your age. In some cases, imprinting happened later in life, and in other cases, it happened earlier in life. It would be nice if she would have made the caveat that, you know, maybe you feel a twinge of something at a certain age, but it's not until the person is full grown. The wolves don't age until they're ready to. I can't remember the exact lore, but they basically say 25 as long as they need to remain active as a shapeshifter. I think given that, it would have been better, since she is making this all up, to just make it so that the person has to be at least your age for you to fully imprint on them, because there's a lot of complications when you start looking at a person who is fully grown and is obsessed with a 3-year-old, or then we get to Jacob's case, a newborn. The major complications there is the implications of grooming. For example, the question was brought up in the book, so what happens if the person doesn't want to be with you? And this is something that a lot of fantasy narratives struggle with. I'm currently reading A Court of Thorns and Roses, and they have something similar with the mating bond. And the question is brought up because it seems like usually the men are the ones who feel that mating bond or notice it, and then the other partner could choose not to comply with that bond. And so whenever in fantasy stories we have this concept of people being destined for each other, it can get tricky because you have the question of free will. But here with the age difference, it's the issue of grooming, because if in this case, Claire, who's the little girl that Quill imprints on, or Renesmee, who Jacob imprints on, they won't really have a full life of being able to explore, date, do all these things, because they've got this looming guy always around in the background, and this understanding once they get to a certain age that this is going to be the person that they end up with. It kind of makes me think about The Time Traveler's Wife. I read that book, and I remember feeling like a lot of those scenes were very uncomfortable. And you know what? Actually, in there, the main character's name is Claire as well. But Claire in The Time Traveler's Wife meets Henry when she is a little girl. So he doesn't meet her for the first time, because if you're familiar with the Time Traveler's Wife story, I'm not going to explain everything, but basically he jumps in time involuntarily, and he meets her for the first time, I think, when he's in his 20s, but she meets him for the first time when she's like 6. She figures out over time that they're going to be together. So she's ultimately not given a ton of autonomy or agency, because she knows the whole time that she's going to end up marrying him. So anytime we're dealing with a story, science fiction, fantasy that has these elements, we're going to have question free will. But Stephenie Meyer definitely does not seem to have any sort of age icks, because, she first has Edward, who's over 100 years old, dating Bella, who is a minor at the time, 17. You could have literally started dating someone who was in their 20s, at least. But no, you go back to high school and fall in love with someone who's a teenager. Then we've got the imprinting situation with Renesmee and Jacob and Quill and Claire. Someone even commented recently, shout out to you, about how Rosalie, even though she was the person who says she wish someone would have voted no for her becoming a vampire, when she first encounters Emmett, seeing his curly brown hair makes her think of the child she could have had one day. And she wants Carlisle to save him and make him a vampire when he was bleeding out after being attacked by a bear. Stephenie Meyer, her mind definitely is interesting when it comes to adult child relationships, and I guess crossing the blurry line between appropriate and inappropriate. She definitely told a story that millions of people have been able to buy into, but when you peel back the layers, it is very weird to see that there are definitely elements of pedophilia throughout these stories. I have had 1 or 2 people comment and say it's weird that I even like the movies or the books in the first place, but I am the kind of person, even as a therapist, hearing other people's trauma, I'm able to compartmentalize. So I can recognize that there are things that are toxic or unhealthy, dysfunctional, and still be able to enjoy a love story and enjoy the music and the effort that went into creating the art that goes into it. Just like when we watch reality TV and we see those toxic patterns, a lot of people are able to still feel entertained even though there's so much drama. I'm the kind of person that prefers some fictional drama and issues over real life drama and issues, because I'm working with that every day. So this is actually a break for me to see some stuff that's so out of this world that I won't really have to deal with in session. But we cannot talk about the concept of imprinting without talking about an underlying theme of inappropriate matches based on age in the Twilight series. Just can't do it. Those are my thoughts on Imprinting. Again, first seeing it, I didn't really have an issue with it. And I thought that she explained it in a way where I didn't get the ick. But when you pull it back and you look at all of the instances, it's definitely something to call into question. So I understand absolutely why some people cannot get past that, especially if you have a trauma history that involves anything that feels familiar to this. I absolutely can understand why you would not be able to compartmentalize, as I have my own personal trauma histories that would prevent me from compartmentalizing other stories. This one, I'm able to just see it through the lens of my teenage self whenever I want to, and then also see it as through the lens of a therapist when I need to. So again, Breaking Dawn Part 1 has probably been one of my favorites. Now we'll be talking about Breaking Dawn Part 2, and we'll be finishing up the Twilight series. Some of you have asked about The Summer I Turned Pretty, which I haven't read, but keep your requests coming. I love doing series like this because, you know, we can build our own little fan base based on all these videos. I love hanging out with you all. So especially if you're in the live premiere, thank you for chatting with me. I love chatting live with you guys and seeing your thoughts in the moment. You all help me shape the videos because it gives me clarity on what you're wanting me to talk about. I was kind of surprised that so many people wanted me to talk about imprinting, and it made sense. Like, of course you guys would want me to talk about that. I ask that you like this video, subscribe to my channel, make sure to check out NordVPN in the description box below. Thank you again to them for sponsoring the video today, and thank you so much for watching until the end. You guys, that helps me a lot. It really helps me so much with the YouTube algorithm and getting the channel out to other people so I can produce more content. So thank you, thank you, thank you.